Today is October 28th, 2003. We're at Thomas Nelson Community College. My full name is Carol Ann Scott. During my military service, my name was James Fielder Scott. My birth date is... My address is Williamsburg, Virginia, 23185. My branch of service was the United States Army. I served in Vietnam, and my highest rank was captain. The interviewers today are Scotty Springston, Don Byers, and Cameron Sound are Marlene Waters and Barbara Dorr.
Very good. Well, Carol, we thank you for coming and talking to us today. When did you enter the Army?
I was commissioned from ROTC in 1969.
Okay.
Texas Tech.
Texas Tech.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With that in light, I kind of couldn't resist the temptation. What was it like to be in ROTC and Texas Tech during those years of '69 when there was so much turmoil?
Well, in West Texas, it's a pretty conservative area, so we didn't have as many demonstrators as we might have had in other areas. We did have a few, but during my course of studies and going through the ROTC program, we didn't pay much attention to it. We just knew we had a mission, and we went ahead with it. We didn't worry about that. Mm-hmm. We weren't against the demonstrators. We thought they had a right to demonstrate, but we didn't pay much attention to it.
Was there demonstrations on the campus of Texas Tech?
There were a few, yes.
Mm-hmm. About how many ROTC students did you have there?
Our brigade of cadets was around 350, I believe, at that time, in '69.
It was not mandatory?
No, it wasn't, not at Texas Tech.
Okay, after you got out of school, tell us about going in the Army.
I graduated with honors. I was a distinguished military graduate, and I received a regular Army commission. And I immediately reported to Fort Benning, Georgia for Infantry Officers Basic Course. And following that, I went into Airborne School and then Ranger, all at Fort Benning.
Okay, tell us about your basic infantry training.
I believe it was 9 weeks of just your basic leadership skills and basic infantry skills.
Okay, right there on the post, or did you go out in other places and train, or?
No, all of the ILBC classes were right there on Fort Benning. Some were classroom studies and others were field activities.
Okay. What about the airborne training? That must have been exciting.
It was. I thought it was a lot of fun, actually. Airborne school was 3 weeks, and we had to make 5 jumps to qualify, and I enjoyed that.
You only made 5 jumps?
5 jumps.
I thought it would have been more than that. Okay, tell us about Ranger School. That must be an experience.
I was looking forward to Ranger School, and I did enjoy it somewhat, but it was a very grueling course. It's 9 weeks, 3 weeks at Fort Benning, 3 weeks in the mountains of Dahlonega, Georgia, and 3 weeks in the swamps of Florida. And by the end of the 9 weeks, you're pretty worn out because they don't let you sleep very much and they don't give you much food. That's part of the stress they put you under, but nevertheless, I made it, and I was happy to go through it.
I've often wondered how the instructors in that school, because they have to endure a good bit of that same rigor.
Not quite.
Oh, okay.
Not quite. They, in normal circumstances, the instructors will come out with you and stay with you for 24 hours, and then they'll change shifts. Okay. So while we were out there for 3 weeks straight, they took it in one-day segments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, after you got out of school, you went to West Point and worked with the cadets there. What kind of reception did you get there?
Well, my first assignment was with the 82nd Airborne, okay. And from there, my battalion was sent to West Point for the summer of 1970 to provide support for the West Point cadets. And for me, I didn't really interact with the cadets too much. My job was providing support for my soldiers and seeing that we got our jobs done up there. So we were pretty busy just doing our normal military duties and didn't participate with the cadets too much.
Okay. So you did not have a chance. I feel that that particular time, the college campuses and so much were in turmoil. I think the cadets at West Point, I was wondering if you haven't got a feel for that.
I understand your question, and honestly, I don't. I don't. I'm sure that they were just as dedicated to the job as all the rest of us were. And most of us in the military at that time were just, we knew we had our duty to perform, and we were happy to do it, and we went ahead and did it.
Sure. Okay. When did you receive orders to Vietnam?
While I was at West Point, I requested orders to Vietnam that summer, and I was given orders to report in September.
Why did you choose to request orders for Vietnam?
During my college days, I had determined that I would make a career out of the Army. I was born during World War II. My father was an Army officer, and I was an Army brat, and I grew up with the Army. And during college, I just decided that that would probably be a good career for me. And in doing so, I thought that the best thing I could do would be to be an infantry officer and go to all the hardest schools I could. And in being a career officer, I felt it was necessary for me to go to Vietnam.
Okay. When you got ready to go to Vietnam, what were your preparations? What particular training did they give you other than what you already had?
Well, actually, all the units in the Army at the time were training for Vietnam-type duty. And everywhere you went, that was just a normal part of the routine. I recall, in many instances, being trained in so-called Viet Cong villages. Every post had one. But specifically in preparation for Vietnam, I don't think there was any specified training for soldiers going over. In my case, I was given orders to go to Fort Sherman, Panama Canal for 2 weeks of jungle training. That was really my preparation.
Okay.
So I went down there and went through the jungle school, which was an interesting school. I enjoyed that training as well. And then had a few days leave and reported Travis Air Force Base in California for my flight over.
Where did you go once you got in country?
We arrived at Bien Hoa, out of Saigon, and we were processed there. It took 2 days, I believe, to be processed. And I was given orders to report to the 1st Brigade Separate 5th Infantry Division Mechanized up on the DMZ, Northern I Corps.
And did you stay there for a while, or did you get another assignment?
I spent approximately 10 or 11 months with the 1st Brigade on the DMZ, and I had received orders to return home, but they were looking for airborne officers to transfer in country to the 173rd Airborne Brigade at LC English and to come home with that unit because they were short of airborne officers. So I volunteered to do that, and I was transferred there and spent another month with the 173rd and came home with them.
Since this tape may be viewed by people in 200 years from now that really have no concept of Vietnam, I think you have a map there. Could you kind of point out where you were so that people can get an idea? Can you zoom in?
Would this work?
Yeah, just hold it. Yeah, right.
Okay. This isn't the best map we could find today, but South Vietnam at that time in history covered this portion here and up to the 17th parallel where the DMZ was. And the northernmost province of South Vietnam was Quang Tri Province on the DMZ. And the 1st Brigade, 5th Infantry Division was stationed right on the DMZ. Our combat support base was at Quang Tri. We were the furthest northern unit in the United States Army in Vietnam.
So how far were you from the border?
We were on the border.
You were on the border, okay.
we were there.
Okay. Well, what were living conditions like? Just so we can get a basis for history so people can look at it.
Well, there were two ways we lived there. One was in the combat support base where we lived in plywood, what we call hooches, just plywood shacks. That's when we're in the combat base. When we're out in the field during operations, there were no living conditions. We lived in the dirt and the mud, and the grass and the trees. It was camping.
It was camping.
With a twist.
Okay, and you had a platoon. How many men were you in charge of?
My platoon had approximately 23 men at any given time. The platoon authorized strength should have been around 40, 42 men.
Okay, so you had really about half a platoon of
Yes,
of the
but that was
authorized.
common in Vietnam.
Okay. Can you remember the approximate ages of some of these people? I'm curious to know.
They were all very young men. They were in their around 20. I think the older men in the platoon were maybe in their mid-20s.
What were your senior NCO rank?
An East 7,
Seven?
platoon sergeant, and I think he was maybe 35. I'm guessing.
You, as a young lieutenant, you come to depend on that guy a lot, do you not?
Well, that's you're putting me on the spot here. I'm going to be honest with you and say that by that time in the war, many of the good officers and NCOs were gone. And there were plenty of young officers like me, inexperienced, but many of the NCOs were also inexperienced by that time. In fact, the person that I had as a platoon sergeant was not, he was not an experienced infantry soldier. So that was hard on all of us.
Okay, that would make a difference.
It did.
Because those, as a young lieutenant, I know I learned to depend on my NCOs a great deal.
Well, and that's normally the case. And but Vietnam was a strange animal,
Sure.
and we had difficulties and personnel shortages and problems. It was hard on all of us.
Did most of your young troops have any combat experience, or are most new guys?
Well, of course, they were all more experienced than I was when I arrived.
Sure.
But and some of them had been in firefights. All of them had been in the field. So yes, they were all combat experienced to some extent.
Do you remember your first combat patrol?
I do. I was very nervous to go out on my first combat patrol, and I recall that we got on the ground. We combat assaulted with helicopters. We got on the ground and without any contact, and we started to move to our objective. And along the way, we encountered a booby trap which was set off and injured one of my men. Very first day of my operation.
Did it bother you that you were leading a group of troops on your first patrol? And
No, I didn't think of that. I was very keyed up. A lot of adrenaline going, and I was happy to be there. I knew that was my job, and I just wanted to learn as much as I could and do the best I could.
this first patrol, how long did you stay out? Do you remember?
We normally operated for 2 weeks in the field. Then we would come back to the combat base for 2 nights to get a hot shower, hot meal, and clean our weapons and get a little sleep before we
So-
went back out for 2 more weeks.
Let's talk about the patrol. What was it like? What did you do? What were your objectives?
On that patrol and many of the following patrols, we were simply told to go from point A to point B, and if we encountered the enemy, then we were to engage them. And I might add that where we were located there in northern I Corps, my unit and my battalion, we operated in the mountainous area, mountainous, forested area. The 5th Mech was a mechanized brigade, and most of the battalions in the brigade were mechanized, but our battalion was straight infantry, and that's why they used us in the mountains.
Is there a particular mission or combat patrol that you remember that brings out special memories that you can relate and
course.
tell us about?
Of course. There were several, but one in particular, we had 3 platoons moving with our company commander and his team, and we needed to get across a swollen stream. The monsoons had just begun, and the company commander had taken one of the other platoon leaders down to that stream to recon and to see how to get the rest of us across, and he and that platoon leader attempted to string a rope across the stream to create a bridge, not a bridge where you go above the water, but where you can go through the water. And in the process of doing that, they were out of sight from the rest of us, but in the process, the lieutenant was swept down that stream apparently to his death. And those of us in the other platoons immediately went down to that stream to try to recover him, the lost lieutenant. But we were ordered out of the area immediately because our mission required us to keep moving. And for me, that was a very sobering moment in my tour of duty. I had been trained and brought up with the concept that in the United States Army we don't leave our people behind, dead or wounded. And so to leave Lieutenant Stringer there really hurt, and it started a process with me that soured me on the entire experience of Vietnam. And myself and my fellow platoon leaders and also the soldiers got a bad message from that experience that if they were injured or wounded, we might not stay for them. So that was not a very good experience at all.
Where did this order come from?
Company commander.
From the company commander, and he was down there with the lieutenant.
At the time that the lieutenant was swept away, yes.
That's me. That is not the way they're told that you treat your lost people.
No, it isn't. And I think, if anything, and the reason I'm happy to be here to give my experiences in the war is that Vietnam War was not the way we were raised to think of wars in our country. Mm-hmm. There were many bad experiences in that war.
Well, some other experiences you'd like to relate?
Very much. As I went through my tour of duty there, as the days and the weeks went by, it became obvious to me that we didn't have a real plan to commitment to that war. Again, this was in 1970, toward the end of 1970, and our government apparently at that time had conceded that the war was essentially over and that they were going to start winding down the war. But for us, out there in the field, still committed, we were under fire. We were in combat, and to us, it was a life and death situation out there every day. Every minute of every day was life and death for us. And so not to have a clear purpose and not to have our commanders come down and explain to us why we were there and what our goals were was very difficult. And it was difficult for me as a young platoon leader because I couldn't tell my men why they had to go out and do this day after day. I didn't have the information to motivate them to do this. And even though they were fine young men, they were great men, and they did what they had to do. But we were all a little disconcerted that we really didn't seem to have a purpose there. And I can further that by giving you an idea of the kind of environment that we were in, the combat environment. We never did have a large engagement with any enemy forces. In our case, we would patrol through jungles and mountains and forests looking for the enemy, but the enemy didn't really want to be found. And our encounters normally were with booby traps or landmines. Occasionally the enemy would mortar us. Occasionally he would fire at us with snipers. But we never saw the enemy. In my whole year in Vietnam, I never saw the enemy. Never saw him. I never fired my rifle at an enemy soldier. I would love to have done that. That was my job, but I never saw one in the flesh. And that takes a toll on you after a while, because while you can't see the enemy, he can see you. And especially the way we operated in Vietnam. And here's an example of that. Toward the end of the war, the Army began to pack its bag, so to speak, to come home, and they started accounting for all the weapons. We had to turn in extra weapons. A policy came out that the soldiers in the field would get a hot meal every day, regardless. No exceptions. And that's a fine idea. However, in reality, if we are moving in the jungle and we have to, around 11 o'clock in the morning, we have to start looking for an LZ for a bird to bring in our hot lunch, that takes time. Then the bird comes in, drops off the lunch, we consume the lunch and the supplies, and about an hour later the bird will come back and pick up all of our trash and the thermite jugs that the food came in, and then we can start moving again. So we've effectively been stopped for 2 hours, and the worst part of this is not the stopping. The worst part is that the enemy can see the helicopter. He knows exactly where we are now. So it's very touchy to move off into the field again after a hot lunch, because the enemy knows exactly where you are.
Sure.
So that was very difficult. Another bad aspect of working in the field in Vietnam was the jungle rot, and we all had jungle rot. And I don't know what jungle rot was, but our skin would blister up and fester in some cases, and sometimes we'd get infections. But there was always something on our skin from the terrain we went through, and we all had jungle rot. And of course we didn't get to bathe very often out there, and often we would move through water, we'd get leeches. Leeches were really not a threat to us in any way. It's just uncomfortable to find leeches in your clothes. And then of course it was hot, it was raining during monsoon season, it was dusty, very, very difficult conditions. And the field itself was hard to operate in because of the tall grass, the thick jungle, the canopy. It was a guerrilla's heaven, and it was hard for us to make headway through it. I've got a few things here I might tell you that might be of interest. On Thanksgiving of 1970, my platoon and company were operating in a small fire base called Alpha 4, which is right on the DMZ. It's the northernmost outpost of the Army, Alpha 4. The Marines who were there before us called it Cantien. And it's a very small little base. We would patrol out of there along the DMZ. But on Thanksgiving, it's Army tradition to feed the troops a hot meal, a hot turkey meal, and they did a great job. They did that for us. They fed us in a little shack of a building, like a little hooch, and we had a visitor. It was a 4-star admiral. It was Sinkpak, who was in effect over General Abrams, who was in charge of Vietnam. So he was a pretty big man to be visiting us in this little outpost up there, and the soldiers picked up on that right away. And as he was eating dinner with them, or lunch, or whatever it was, I was sitting at the table, the next table over from the admiral, and I was listening. One of the soldiers didn't mince words. He said, "Admiral, what are you doing here? Why'd you come here to this forsaken place on Thanksgiving Day?" And the admiral said, "Well, my son's a prisoner in North Vietnam, and this is the closest I can get to him." And that, of course, was Admiral John McCain, and his son was John McCain, Senator now, John McCain. So that was an interesting experience for me.
Can I pause just 1 second?
Of course.
What was the reaction of your troops to the admiral being there? Was it positive, or was it negative, or did they just think he was crazy?
Well, they were humbled to hear his reason for being
Okay.
there, and they identified with that wholeheartedly, and they were very happy to see him there. And the reason I say that is because we didn't see our own commanders there. We didn't see the Army commanders, not the colonel, not the general wouldn't come up to see us. But here was the Sinkpak, a 4-star admiral. He came to see us. So they were very happy to see him, very impressed to see him. Another interesting thing that happened was approaching Christmas the same year, 1970, we began to hear stories about Bob Hope. And of course, all of us had grown up knowing that Bob Hope visited the troops when they were in combat or in the wars. And so we were looking forward to that. And then one day we got a message, and we're told that Bob Hope would be going to Da Nang, which is about 100 miles south of where we were, and we could not go see him. However, they would allow one soldier from each platoon to go down to the show. And we were all disappointed, of course, but we were happy to have one person go. and we were allowed to choose our own method. In our case, we drew straws, and I didn't participate. There's no way in the world that I, the platoon leader, was going to go see Bob Hope, and not my men. So one soldier was selected, and he was sent back in on a log bird, and they were all supposed to get on a Chinook and be taken down to the show. A day later, he was flown back out to our site in the field and dropped off, and he was grinning. And we said, "Well, how was it?" And he said the Chinook broke down, and they never did get there. So nobody from our battalion got to see Bob Hope. But that's not to disparage Bob Hope. We were all happy that he did what he did. He did a wonderful job. Speaking of holidays, though, Thanksgiving and Christmas, there were 2 or 3 ceasefires in effect while I was in Vietnam. I think one was Tet, and one might have been Christmas or New Year's, and maybe Thanksgiving. But unfortunately, in our battalion, on each and every holiday or ceasefire, the enemy killed one of our soldiers. And one time it was a sniper, and one time it was a mortar attack. And it left such a bitter taste in our mouth that they would do that. The North Vietnamese were not, in our opinion, they were not honorable. They broke the ceasefire. They would do anything to kill us, and to them it didn't make any difference. And there were many horror stories in Vietnam, and it's behavior like that really that generates those kinds of things. But it was sad that on those ceasefires they would attack us. But we learned to be prepared for it, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. There were some other, in my experience in Vietnam, we had numerous senseless deaths in our organization, and I think this was throughout the Army as well. Lieutenant Stringer was the lieutenant that was washed down the stream. In our battalion, we had a 3-man team was killed when they made some errors setting up a claymore mine. They blew themselves up. We often had soldiers that would call in artillery, and there would be errors made somewhere, and we'd suffer casualties from that. There were just numerous casualties, self-inflicted casualties, and these set us back as well, and made it such a horrible experience. In one case, at a base called Charlie 2, which was just south of Alpha 4, where Admiral McCain was, and many of the soldiers went into a bunker while they were under a rocket attack, and they were told to disperse when they go into these bunkers. Not everyone go into the same bunker, but 60 men crowded into one bunker, and that bunker was hit, and 30 of them were killed, and all of the rest were wounded. And that was a horrible loss. I understand that General Abrams hit the roof when that happened, but those things occurred. Another senseless death that I witnessed was at Quang Tri, at the airfield there. We had a Air Force detachment of OV-10 Broncos up there, forward air support, and we had a lieutenant colonel, an Air Force lieutenant colonel, who was our liaison officer, Air Force liaison officer, and on the staff of the 1st Brigade, and he was the detachment commander for those aircraft. He was being replaced. A major had come in to take over for him, and as a final gesture, the colonel took the major out in a Bronco to view the area of operations. And on their return, the colonel was doing aerial stunts with the OV-10 over the airfield, and I was on the combat base playing some volleyball actually that day, and for whatever reason, that OV-10 went straight in the ground on one of his maneuvers and killed both of them. And it was another instance of just 2 senseless deaths, just such a waste, and that happened so many times there. Vietnam was somewhat of a Alice in Wonderland kind of a thing. It was very surreal. I know on the last day that I was there, we were preparing to leave, and we formed up to move to a helicopter which was going to take us to the airfield at Quin Yon to leave. And as we were in the formation, one soldier threatened to kill another. Started shouting at him. He pulled a .45 pistol, and we all were in shock. What's going on here? We were not supposed to have any weapons. Those were all turned in. And the first sergeant approached the man, very gently took the weapon away from him out of his hand. But for some reason, the first sergeant didn't pull the trigger to see if it was loaded, and it was. It went off and really rattled everybody. Everybody was very rattled. And here was almost an attempted murder, but we had to get to the airfield to move the unit out. So one man was put at the beginning of the formation, the other man at the end, and we moved out. And I don't think any charges were ever preferred against that man. But a few minutes later, we were in the woods along the Quin Yon airfield waiting for a 707. We were not in a terminal. They never put us in a terminal. And a Jeep came up, and then a couple more trucks behind that Jeep, and out came Miss America. And again, we were beginning to wonder, what's reality here? But they had just arrived in country, and their handlers said, well, let's go over and see these soldiers who are leaving. So they brought them over and introduced them to the soldiers. But anyone who's been in Vietnam should know that soldiers get very keyed up in the last few days when they're getting ready to leave. And these guys were maybe an hour from leaving, and they really weren't interested in Miss America. They just wanted to be left alone and get out safely. And so we flew out on a 707. The plane stopped twice for gas, but it took us directly back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And this was the sort of the last slap in the face of my Vietnam experience. The plane landed at Fort Campbell in the dark, late at night, and the plane taxied to the end of the airfield, which was surrounded by woods, and we were told to get out of the aircraft there. We came down a ramp onto the tarmac. There were no buildings around us, and we were formed up there, moved off the airfield, off the strip, so the plane could turn around and leave. And we were left there in the dark, and then we were marched to an isolated building near the end of the airfield there, where we were strip searched, every one of us, officers and men. We had to take all of our clothes off. We had to bend over and spread our cheeks so we could be strip searched. And I suppose they were looking for drugs, but it was very, it was a bad experience, and it was indignant that we were treated that way, because we felt we served our country. And I know the soldiers that I served with over there were not drug addicts like the media would say. They couldn't be drug addicts, or they'd all be dead, because we couldn't survive in the field if we weren't alert, and they were always alert. So to come back and be treated that way was really another bad experience.
Do you have any idea whether that was a fairly common? I have never heard that before.
I don't know. I don't know. I wish I did. It might have been peculiar to Fort Campbell, but I don't know.
I wondered if it could have been some they had gotten word that some drugs were en route home or something like that.
It might have been, but we all had to go through it.
Sure.
The whole plane load.
I think you participated in one operation called Operation Lamsong. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I did. Toward the end of the war, the government, our government, wanted to make one last attempt to prosecute the war and to get the South Vietnamese involved. And the plan was to send the South Vietnamese into Laos and to destroy the enemy there. And in order to do that, the U.S. forces retook Khe Sanh airfield up in the mountains. And from there, we supported them going into Laos. The operation didn't go very well. We did our part around Khe Sanh, fine, but the South Vietnamese were pretty much destroyed when they went into Laos by the North Vietnamese, and so that operation was quite a disaster. And during the process, the U.S. forces lost approximately 450 aircraft, and I know that because at the time I was in the headquarters of the 1st Brigade, and I was a liaison officer to the headquarters of the 101st Airborne Division. And I was told that by an aviation staff officer in the 101st. And what happened is, during that operation, which took about a month and a half, we took many helicopter losses, and the media began to pick up on that, and the Army officials didn't care for that, and so they changed the rules about what a lost aircraft was. And I recall specifically hearing from these officers that any aircraft that could be recovered, or any piece of an aircraft that could be recovered, would not be considered a loss. That would be a recovered aircraft. And for instance, so if you could recover a tail skid or a tail boom or something, then that's not a lost aircraft. And that was done to keep these numbers down because they were becoming alarming. But 450 aircraft was the actual figure that was lost, or close
These
to it.
Army aircraft or all forces?
No, and it was primarily Army
Primary
helicopters. Yes. So just more bad stuff out of Vietnam. I think wars can lead to that. They say truth is lost when you really get into this. But there's another thing I'd like to mention, and that's Agent Orange. And while I was at Quang Tri, I was actually sprayed by Agent Orange on 2 occasions, maybe 3. I do remember 2. And of course, the whole area up there on the northern, along the DMZ, was heavily defoliated, and we worked in that. We lived and worked in that. And I remember seeing the C-123 providers come over spraying, and on several occasions. And then a few years after I got back from Vietnam, I came down with Hodgkin's disease, cancer. And the doctors at the time told me that I had a very unusual case that they had never seen before. They couldn't explain it. They knew it was Hodgkin's, but it was presented in a way that they were not familiar with. And that was in the mid-70s. And then a few years later, all of the information started to come out on Agent Orange, and it was the Veterans Administration has accepted Hodgkin's as an Agent Orange cancer. So,
well, how were you treated by the military, by the VA?
The VA treated me very well. They did, and there was not any problem. As soon as they got that on the books, then I was eligible for disability compensation.
Mm-hmm. That was a big struggle, I know, for a lot of guys.
It
They were
was.
not accepted for a while.
It was, and still may be for some.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that. Okay, returning to Canas, what did you do when you returned back here?
I came back with the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and they were redesignated as the 3rd Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. Okay. And coming back, we were immediately put back on airborne status, and we had to go through our refresher training for airborne jumping. And I was tapped to go to Jump Master School, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And so for the next 2 years, we were on jump status, and I became a jump master and earned my senior wings jumping. And during that time frame, I was a platoon leader in a Company XO. Mm-hmm. And at the end of 2 years, the Army was going to the modern volunteer concept, the VOLAR concept, and Les Aspin, a congressman at the time, was trying to reduce costs in the military, and they were successful in eliminating the airborne status in our division, which was not good for morale at the time, but we couldn't get around it. So
I need to back up.
Sure.
Eliminating the airborne status. What are they eliminating?
Well, we wouldn't jump anymore, and we wouldn't receive jump pay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what I...
And if you've got an airborne division, the 101st Airborne Division, that's their cachet.
Right. Absolutely.
So if you take it away, who are they anymore? So the commanding general at the time was Sid Berry, Major General Sid Berry, and he had to do something to maintain morale in the unit. And he came up with the Air Mobile school concept. So he created a new school for air mobile tactics, and we would be an air mobile division, as the 101st actually was in Vietnam. And in doing so, he wanted to create a school and a program for that training. And I was again tapped to be part of the team that created that school, and eventually that became the Air Assault School, the Army's Air Assault School. And so I spent over a year with that school, and we began that program. And soon after I left the Army, the Army accepted the Air Assault badge as an Army qualification badge, and it was acceptable throughout the Army, which is good. And it did help bring some morale and esprit de corps back to the 101st Airborne Division.
That's interesting. So you left the Army
Yes, in 1975.
in '75. Okay. Well, I don't know. Is there anything that we have not discussed that you would like to talk about? I would just open forum.
I would just say that Vietnam was not exactly a positive experience, but all of the men who went over there tried their best. They did their best, and I don't think we give them enough credit for what they did there.
Agree with that. Don, do you have any other questions?
That's fine. That's
Okay,
fine.
well, Carol, we surely appreciate you coming and talking to us, and I just really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us.
Well, thank you, Scotty. I enjoyed it.
Okay.